I'm one of the NYC Data Science Academy's career services advisors. And one thing that I personally like about our programs is that we offer lifelong support. Just like Drace mentioned in the previous slide, right? You can book those one-on-one mentorship sessions and the lifelong support. What that really means is that I'm currently still interacting with students who started in our bootcamp maybe since 2013 or who have held several positions in industry and maybe just need to brainstorm career changes out loud or want to practice interview skills or how to handle those salary negotiations that really take you to that next step in your career. So with this one-on-one mentorship, you can discuss those job search strategies and we're happy to look over those resumes, cover letters, and offer connections, both to, warm or cold outreach to our hiring partners in the area and outside of it. And to give you a bit more insight, like Noah mentioned in the beginning, we did have two students who offered, Sita and Kesman, to join us today and share a little bit about their experience. So before we get into that Q&A portion, again, feel free to jump in the chat and mention any questions that you have along the way, but I just wanted to hear from Kesman and Sita. Would you guys be able to tell us a little bit about maybe where you're from, your professional background, and what brought you to our boot camp?
I'll go first. I'm Sita, and I am currently in North Carolina. I'm about halfway, a little bit more than halfway through the program. And my background is I got my bachelor's degree in experimental psychology, research psychology. So I have a little bit of a stats background, but then I wandered away from that for like more than 10 years and went in a completely different direction. I was in healthcare and health and wellness. And then after having that career for quite a long time, I decided that I wanted something different, a little bit more of a challenge. I wanted to learn something new, and I wanted to kind of get back to those roots for my bachelor's degree. So that's what drew me to the bootcamp in the first place.
Awesome. And
hello, I'm Kesman, Valdes. I grew up in Cuba, but moved to the US, I think 5 years ago. Was living in Chicago. This past weekend, I moved to North Carolina. So my background is mechanical engineering, material science, so engineering background. I didn't have really any coding experience, but definitely some statistical background, some math background with my engineering degrees. But I've been working in industry, manufacturing, so that's kind of what drove me into kind of the data science field first, and then realizing that I needed a boot camp. So that's how I got here.
Got it. And you were working full-time, while you took on the boot camp, right?
Right.
Awesome. How was it like juggling those two things? What was it like for you?
So one of the things is that I didn't want to quit my job to get into the boot camp. I always had interest in applying the data science skills in my field, like mechanical engineering and things like that. So one of the things that I wanted from the beginning was to be able to do both at the time. So before joining the bootcamp, I did some Coursera courses and did some online. And I realized that it was very challenging. I didn't have the confidence that I was doing the right things, getting the right skills. So when I joined the bootcamp, I chose the online part-time one because that gave me the flexibility, but also had the right curriculum. So it was pretty challenging because my coding skills were not strong at all. I just did kind of like a couple of months of Coursera on Python. That was the only thing that I had on coding skills, and that's a skill that you need to be able to progress through the bootcamp. So it was pretty challenging. It was something that I need to, I didn't realize how much time and effort I had to put to be able to make progress. So it was challenging, but I think that's the kind of challenge you will expect in a program at this level if you want to make some sort of a career change, a radical career change. Yeah. So it was like that.
Okay, great. And Sita, I know that you're currently a bootcamp student. So, and also I think you mentioned even before that you were also a business owner. How were you also juggling those things, with our bootcamp? What was that all like for you?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about the commitment that I was making because I knew that I was going to be intense, and I knew that I was going to have to handle some things with my business, especially with the pandemic. I ended up kind of switching tack. I was going to, cut back on my business and work very little during the bulk of the boot camp, especially until I got sort of an idea of what I wanted my flow to be in the boot camp and how much time I would really have. I thought maybe I'd put a few hours in here and there. But then I got to a point where the pandemic just didn't seem like it was going to resolve anytime soon. I was kind of burning money on the business end of things, keeping it open. And so I ended up deciding to just close down altogether. So I ended up actually backing away from the boot camp and did very little in the boot camp for a couple of weeks while I facilitated the shutdown of my business. So I was kind of like, I dived in full time early on in the pandemic because I started in April. And I really dived in, worked kind of full time on the boot camp, and then backed way off to like really minimal part-time. And then just recently, I started coming back to sort of those full-time hours with the boot camp. So I sort of did a little mixture of both, really immersed myself in the boot camp, took a break, and then came back, and I'm back to sort of immersing myself in the boot camp. And I definitely prefer focusing on it full-time, doing the immersion. It's way easier to learn more and more deeply than it is when I was doing it more part-time. So I would definitely encourage people to have that commitment and just be aware of what you can do. If you can't dedicate as much time, just know that you might have to come back after you finish the boot camp and work on some other skills and stuff that you maybe didn't get if you kind of had to rush to the boot camp. But if you can fully immerse, that would definitely be ideal. I mean, you can do it both ways, but be I guess realistic about what you can expect from yourself during the boot camp, because it is rigorous. It is rigorous.
Yeah. Do you mind, I guess, diving a little bit deeper into that experience, kind of transitioning between the full-time and part-time, online boot camp? What were the main differences you would say between the two were?
I mean, it was a lot of focus, really. It was much harder when I was doing it part-time. So I was able to get one project in when I was working more at that full-time pace early on. I blazed through it. I felt really good. I did the presentation, and then I was like, okay, I'm sort of between projects. Let me back way off. And then when I went to and then I did all the lecture material between the projects. So I kind of slogged my way through that kind of slowly. And then I started working on the project while I was still handling business stuff. And the experience trying to do that first project and then that second project were so radically different. The second project, where I was going really slowly, I kept having to go back and like revisit lecture materials and revisit my notes a lot more. I did a lot more Googling, a lot more Stack Overflow, looking up, answers to coding questions and stuff. And it just was more tedious. It didn't feel, efficient. It didn't have a flow. I was getting discouraged at a certain point in my project because it was just taking so long and going so slowly. I eventually got it done, and I felt really good about the project. But it was definitely a different experience. And now that I'm back to sort of that full-time pace, I feel much more kind of confident in my absorption of the material, because it's that more immersive. I can remember what I did yesterday rather than a week ago. And so I can connect, I can make the links easier.
Got it. So being able to kind of pace it yourself, you're saying that's what was the most advantageous part of the transition there for you?
Yeah, for me, pacing is huge. Like, even though I don't have anything else going on, I'm not working at all, I still have like a very strict schedule for myself. Every day, I get up at the same time, I have my workflow, I stop and I have lunch, so even though I have like way more time, my schedule is still really tight, and that is super key. I mean, because nobody's really going to be there like, hey, checking in with you, like, did you do your homework today? Like there's deadlines on the LMS, it'll tell you like you should have this done by this day, and to keep you on track. There's a guideline of a schedule, but nobody's like calling you up on Zoom or messaging you on Slack necessarily, unless you ask for it and work with the students and stuff. But it is a lot of self sufficiency. You really have to, you get what you put in, you get out what you put in. So you really have to keep that in mind.
Awesome. And I see you nodding over there, Kesman. Would you say that, seems like you agree?
I really agree with that. And that's something I struggle with myself. So one of the selling point for me was that the bootcamp offered both R and Python. training, and both were pretty comprehensive. Like machine learning and everything was kind of like side by side. They were pretty similar. So at the beginning, I thought that's great because people keep talking about how important it is to know R. Other people discuss about how important it is to know Python. But when you don't have a background or you're not a strong coder in any of the two, that's something that is pretty challenging to manage, especially if you're doing it part-time or you have a busy schedule. And sometimes you spend a week with R and then you don't work on Python 2 or 3 weeks later. So that, going back to what Sita was saying, the rhythm, the pace, the flow, that's something that you really have to pay attention to. And what ended up working out for me was to focus first on one language and just kind of complete all the coursework and get really proficient with R. And then I transitioned to Python. At the beginning, I was trying to do both at the same time. That was the struggle. And it's kind of what Sita was saying, that when you don't have the fluency and you lose that kind of pace, the rhythm, you keep going back to things that are very basic and you keep having these kind of basic issues and you have to Google more, you have to go to ORSAC. So that's the situation you avoid when you get into a flow and the only thing that you do is it's pretty much the same. So definitely be in the mindset of trying to get into a flow and trying to at least spend some time every day coding, every day thinking about the data science space. If you spend a couple of weeks, even 2-3 days could be enough if you don't have a strong coding background to kind of set you off and having to go back and review lectures. So for me, that was a big thing, is trying to stay motivated by having some flow and some regularity. And a big part of it was trying to at least spend some time every day coding, every day watching at least a portion of a lecture. So my brain was always active and nothing was really left behind. So yeah, that helped me a lot.
Got it. That's great. And I saw a question come through in the chat. Ariel Perez said, was math a big challenge to complete the projects?
No, I don't think so. So there are 4 projects, as it was mentioned before. 3 of the projects you pick yourself. So the first one is a Shiny app, which is mainly to kind of explore visualization, how you think really, and how you explore kind of like a question, a problem, and it could be in any space, and that's something that you picked. So if you go to the blog, like the Academy had a really good blog, so you can go through all the projects that have been posted there, and you're gonna realize that most of them are really just asking the right question and using tools that we have and different graphs to answer the question. So you don't really have to know a lot of math. Machine learning is the only one that is more constrained, more specific, but in that one, you're using pretty much the same tools everyone is using. So you have a lot of resources there. And it's still not math intensive. I think the math comes when you're trying to understand what the algorithm is doing behind the scenes and when you're trying to understand why a solution is more optimal than other one. But that's a little bit more advanced topic. And it may be more relevant depending on the type of work you want to do after the bootcamp. But most of the projects, definitely not. That's something that you pick, and you can pick something in your kind of like where you feel comfortable. One of the things with the bootcamp is that you have to manage how much effort you put into it, because you definitely could spend months on just on the first project. So you have to manage how much you want to get out of the project versus the time constraint you have. So that also limits how much you can do with a project and how in depth you try to solve a problem.
Got it. Yeah, and I know you both mentioned, projects being a very heavy part of this, right? Can you guys maybe tell us about your favorite project, or one that was maybe most relevant to your current job, or what is something that you really enjoyed working on through all of that?
Yeah, so for me, surprisingly, and I'm going to kind of piggyback on the last question about the math, was I have major imposter syndrome. I was very nervous coming into the boot camp about my math background, even though I did get, a degree in experimental psychology, and I did a lot of statistics, but I'll admit I was like a solid C student in my statistics classes. Like it wasn't my strongest at all by any means. And it had been so long. I mean, I pretty much had to relearn statistics. You know, I recognized, you know, terms from stats, but it's been, you know, 10, 12 years for me. So I didn't really remember a whole lot of it. So I was very nervous coming in about the math. But now that I'm working on the machine learning module, I'm not quite to the project yet. I'm still doing some of the lectures, but I'm finding myself really interested in it, in the everything happening kind of underneath the hood. Like Kesman said, you can do the coding part of it and set up the algorithms and not really have to know necessarily the math behind it. Like we're not generally here, you know, doing like math by hand. But you do need at least a bit of a foundation, especially in linear algebra. There's a bit of calculus, but it's like mostly linear algebra. And there is plenty of discussions about, you know, in the lectures, you'll see a lot of math equations, you know, that look really intimidating. When I first got into the machine learning, I was like, this is radically different than the first two projects as far as the math content. But it's really mostly used, you know, just theoretically, conceptually, to help you understand why the algorithms work in the way that they do. So if you have a decent, you know, understanding of math, and you can kind of at least follow along with the logic of the equations, then you'll be fine. But it is a little bit more intensive. You know, the machine learning section is definitely more demanding for those of us that are not super strong in math than the data analysis in the beginning, which is a little bit more kind of like just coding heavy and visualization heavy, and you can really get lost in all those little minor details. But the machine learning sections are where the meat really is. You know, it's the really kind of more conceptual stuff, why you do the things that you do to analyze the data. And I'm finding that really interesting, you know, especially in the context of me coming from a psychology background. I'm really interested in like human bias, you know, how that plays in, how we can kind of distort and transform the data. You know, you can obviously do it in a good way, a useful way, you know, to get information out of it. But then I think it can be really easy to just like completely warp everything and you know, not really understand the problem at the root, and sort of get lost in the weeds in that way. So I'm finding it really interesting to really understand the nuts and bolts of it, so that we don't make those mistakes in the industry. You know, how do you do that? It can be so complicated and so easy to morph. So I'm finding that really, really interesting, which I didn't think I would, because I was like, I don't want to do the math part. You know, I kind of want to do the data analysis and the visualization and that kind of stuff, and really do the more communicative part of it. But you know, despite my math imposter syndrome, I'm really interested in it. So hopefully that kind of answers two questions there.
Yeah, awesome. And before we jump into the next question, Kesman, did you have anything to add for those projects that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. I think just adding one more thing to the math part. I think one of the things that I noticed, and we have a couple of our instructors on the panel today, and they can correct me, but one of the things that I noticed the most is that most of the feedback we got when we were presenting the project is not about what algorithm you pick or if it was accurate or not. It was most of the time, are you thinking as a data scientist? Are you asking the right questions? Are you? That's kind of like what you really need to get to. I felt from the feedback we got from them. It's like the mindset of asking the right question, comparing the right data, and thinking as a data scientist. And that's something that you will don't have to have a strong math background or coding background. So you just have to have or get trained and develop that skill throughout bootcamp. So the other thing is the mentors, and that's a big aspect that kind of goes hand in hand with the projects, because as I mentioned, one of the things that I was trying to do is just try to leverage as much as possible my experience at work with the skills I was gaining in the bootcamp. So I worked pretty closely with my mentor. We met pretty much every week, trying to decide the right projects so I could take and make use of the skills I was gaining and use it in my current job. So I started using that, and I also gained some time at work to be able to spend on the projects because they were related to projects or were kind of work related. So that gave me a lot of more motivation, but also I was able to ask more insightful questions. So that's something else I will advise to. Just think how you put something that you're interested in, your passion, because typically the questions you will ask are more in depth. So you will be able to kind of go more in depth, and that will challenge you from every aspect, because once you want to answer a more complex question, then your graph has to be a little more complex. So now you have to divide the data in a different way, and then you have to figure out how to do that with code. So think about a project that you're passionate about. That will help you get more feedback from the instructor when you're presenting, but also you'll be more engaged in general. So in general, I think the projects are a good tool to think and learn how to think and get feedback on that. And an opportunity just to practice what you're learning, but definitely not heavy on math if you don't need to, if you don't want to. It could also be very heavy math if you want to, but it's your choice.
Interesting. That's great. So how many days a week, I guess for both of you, how many days a week and how many hours a day would you say you spend on the boot camp on an average?
I would say for me, when I work at the full-time pace, I try to hit 8 hours a day. And my style is just to spread that out in about 2-hour chunks. Like I'll do 2 hours on, 1 hour off, or half an hour off or something, and then come back and do another 2-hour chunk. So that works really well for me now that I'm doing it sort of at the full-time pace. When I was working more at a part-time pace, I put in more like maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. And this is most days, not, religiously every day by any means, but most days. And I found that a little harder, like Kesman mentioned earlier, even sometimes just 2 or 3 days off can really mess you up if it's a topic that you're not super familiar with. And then I would find myself having to sort of go back and, review, which ends up not wasting time, but, it ends up being a little redundant. If I could maximize my time by working a little bit more and more consistently, a little bit every day rather than, most days, then it has worked out better for me. And yeah, I include weekends in that. Again, I'm not working, so I'm able to do it full time, and still feel like I can have a life, right? But if you have a 9-to-5 job, or you have kids, or you have other obligations or something like that, maybe don't do 6, 7, 8 hours in a day, but still try to do something every day. I would say, from my experience anyway, and just having talking with other students, and just my background in education and psychology and everything, that it's better to do a little bit every day than do like a lot on fewer days.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I went through several phases, but on average, I would say I will spend 2 to 3 hours during the week, at night after work, and then at least 4 or 5 hours during the weekend. And I think the more time I spent on the boot camp, sometimes it was kind of like going backwards, and I will kind of produce less. So I think it's what Sita is saying, trying to pace yourself, something that every day you're doing something, but you're not burning out. So for me, I try to do at least 1 hour kind of like lectures, which is watching a video for everyone that is doing it remotely online. The lectures are typically like 3 hours, so they could be kind of long and tiring. So I try to break that down in smaller pieces and try to spend some time also on a project or coding, so I didn't lose that skill. At the beginning, I was doing like 3 hours first of lecture and then doing coding, and that didn't work very well. So for me, it was at least 2 hours, 1 hour of lecture, 1 hour coding, and then try to do as much as possible of coding project work related during the weekends, and also exams too. I think one of the things that what's helpful for me was to spend like at least 1 day of the weekend just to focus on quizzes and exams. So I have like a very classroom type experience, not at night when I'm tired or anything like that, but the weekend when I'm fresh, that's when I want to take the exams. And those could take a few hours too. So basically, that was what I was doing. And try not to burn yourself, because motivation is a big factor, especially if you're doing it online. And if you get too tired, you could lose that.
Yeah. How did you both kind of keep up that motivation throughout that whole process there?
I would say for me, a big part of keeping up my motivation was preparation before coming into the boot camp. So really examining, why I'm in the boot camp, what I want to do with my career, having that sort of long outlook. So I could always come back to it and be like, oh, this is why I'm suffering. This is why I'm like miserable. And I've been stuck on this, coding problem for 4 hours. And I realized I just need to like move a parentheses, right? So in those moments when I get really frustrated, I can always go back to, oh, okay, why am I actually here? What is my big picture motivation? Next to that, for me, I treat it like it's my job. Like literally right now, it is my job is to be in school. I don't have any other job. So, I show up to work every day. When I was working, I showed up to work every day, and, I didn't think twice about it, unless I was like super sick and didn't want to infect anybody else. That was just what I did. If I felt bad, if I felt crummy, I didn't get a lot of sleep, I just don't want to, I would still go. So, why would this be necessarily any different than that? So that's part of the reason I keep my pretty strict schedule. I try not to deviate that, because same thing at work, you're there from 9 to 5 or whatever. So that's the commitment that you're making. You get paid in actual money at a job, but you will eventually get paid in actual money after the boot camp, but you're getting paid with that knowledge that will lead to extra money. So I think like, did I earn my paycheck today? Did I put in the work today, to set myself up for the future? I think about my future self and I try to take care of her. What she needs, I have to be doing now to get prepared for. And then also for me, a couple of resources that have been really great for me. There's it's a book and it's a course called Learning How to Learn. It's on Coursera. It's by Barbara Oakley. I'll link in the chat, or I'll put the info in the chat, but that's a great book. Learning How to Learn is really good to help with motivation and to help the information stick, which is motivating. When you feel like you're getting it, you can stay more motivated and stay more curious. Another book that I found super, super helpful is Atomic Habits by James Clear. That's a really great resource for setting up habits for yourself and setting up those motivations, setting up those rewards for yourself so that you can actually want to do the things. Because if you actually want to do them, then, you don't need to sort of force this artificial motivation on yourself. You don't mind that you have a strict schedule because you actually want to sit down and work. So those are some of the things that have really helped me.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think for me, motivation, I think one of the things that I saw with the bootcamp is that I will learn skills that were practical and very useful right away. So the main motivation for me was to be able to learn something that I will apply somewhere at work or outside work. One of the things that I was exploring too is how to volunteer. I saw work with data science skills. So when I was looking at the lecture, watching the lectures or learning anything, I was thinking, how can I use this? How can I apply this to something that I'm interested in doing? So that was a big motivation. I was always thinking and I'm framing the learning on the aspect of the projects that I was working on. And the other thing that I mentioned before is I tried to meet with my mentor weekly. And that kind of a checkpoint for someone that is doing it online. If you're not in person, you don't have any kind of like peer-to-peer interaction. So my interaction was with the mentor. So I make sure that I will schedule that every week so I have someone to kind of check my progress and discuss where I was failing. And I have a couple of examples where I felt like, okay, so I need to talk to my mentor about not just my career interests, but also about, in general, how the industry works. And one of them was with the machine learning projects. So there are several aspects about the project itself, but one of them is that you need to kind of clean, transform the data so everything is kind of comparable to each other. And when I was talking to him about it, he said, okay, so in the industry, the data scientist may be in this role, but someone else may be doing that. So you need to understand those situations in the industry so you know how much effort you put into each aspect of the project, because the project itself could be really intensive. You're doing everything from, in the machine learning at least, you're doing everything from data cleaning to machine learning. And sometimes that will be in the industry, the role of several people. So you have to understand that. You have to see where you feel more comfortable. And that's where you want to kind of put as much effort as you can. And then if there's something that is more challenging or you understand very well, or it's just too time consuming, maybe you address that after you're done with the boot camp or at a later time. So that's something that you have to consider. And that came up with the conversation with my mentor, and that helps you feel more accomplished, feel more like you're making progress. So that also helped with my motivation. And just aligning the project with your interests, personal interests. I keep saying that. I think it's the main thing. It's just trying to find something that you're passionate about, because it'll be really interesting to see how you kind of dissect the data, how you dissect the problem, what results you get, what things you didn't know about the situation you're analyzing. So that helps a lot with motivation. So those are the main things for me for motivation, for sure.
That's very interesting, like attaching that personal passion to all of these projects and things that you're learning along the way. I think that kind of alludes to what Joyce was mentioning with the idea of cross collaboration or collaborating with your peers there. Do you guys have any examples or anything to note about that personal or professional communication that you had with your fellow peers or with the instructors at the boot camp?
Yeah, for me, that was a big concern, because I really wanted to do an in-person boot camp. And then, the timing just happened that there was this pandemic, and I figured it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So I wanted to just dive in anyway. So I just committed to the online. But I'm really glad that I did. There was definitely some differences in just like my ability to do the content that I'm enjoying more about being remote. But regarding, peers and communicating and all that kind of stuff, I really, because I was really desiring that to begin with, I was very mindful of that coming in, and mindful that, okay, in this online context, I have to put a little bit more effort into it. Like I'm not just gonna literally bump into people, and then have those connections. Like I have to kind of, make them happen. So I did do, I reached out to a few, students, right? You do orientation, right? And everybody kind of introduces themselves, and so people that I had things I could message later and be like, oh, hey, you said you were, in this city, I used to live there, and just kind of reached out that way. There was a hackathon, Joyce mentioned in the chat, there was a hackathon that was really fun. Kesman, you did that too.
Yeah.
And that was great fun. And I met people that were not in my cohort, which was cool. People that I still, communicate with. In fact, one of the other students I'm thinking about we're talking about collaborating on our machine learning project together, even though he's in a different cohort, we just have the same pacing. And so that was a really great experience. There's, pulse checks every week or every other week, which are really great to connect with other people too, share some ideas, learn some things. I try to make it to the live learning sessions and the alumni talks, where people will be sort of chatting and asking questions. So there's definitely ways to stay involved. You just have to be a little bit more on top of it. And not rely on that physical proximity. You have to create that proximity to people yourself. But, once you do and get the ball rolling, it's really easy. Like me and another student, we were like, hey, Wednesday, let's do like our check-in day. Like Kesman was saying, talking with the mentors on a regular basis. But even students do, just for accountability, be like, hey, let's check in, every Wednesday, see how we're doing, keep each other accountable, keep each other on pace, make sure we're not pulling our hair out or anything like that. So yeah, if you do, again, like I said earlier on, I'll probably say this a million more times, you get out what you put in. So if you want to connect with people, and you work toward it, you will easily make that happen. But if you don't really communicate, you don't talk on Slack, your experience might be a little thinner. But I do know one of the great things about this bootcamp and being in it is that you can actively see the changes that the staff are making, for either your cohort and or future cohorts. So that's really cool. That's something that's really important to me. Like the things that I put my money in, the companies that I invest in, the schools that I invest in, I want to feel like my money is being used well. And I really think it's due. The instructors are always constantly asking for feedback, constantly trying new things. And so I can see that the instructors have, since I started the boot camp, and are still working on, a variety of different ways to improve that ease in connecting with other people. So I definitely think it's only going to get better in the online environment here, even though it's not that bad to begin with. It's still getting better. So I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. Anything to add on there,
Yeah,
Kesman?
yeah. I completely agree with Sita. I think you need to make an effort. The opportunities are there. There's several opportunities that we have, like projects you could pick projects to work with other people. We had the hackathon, which is a competition type format. We present projects, so you get the opportunity to meet other people. But beyond, I think the networking and the experience, I think it's critical that you partner with other people because they will expose you to other ways of thinking, and you also will be able to realize how much of a data science mindset you have already, and people with different background will help you get that faster. But also technically, you have like GitHub, you have tools that you would expect to use in the industry that you touch at the beginning of the bootcamp. I think it's the first few weeks, and no one is asking you to continue to use those tools if you don't collaborate with anyone. So you could use them at the beginning of the bootcamp and never use them again. So when you get to the industry and you get questions about that, you won't feel as confident as you should if you had interact with other people and force yourself to get out there, because that's how you're gonna operate in a real industry. So it's critical. I think it's something that you should definitely get in your part of your curriculum. But as Sita said, it's something that you have to do. It's something that's not going to be forced on you if you're not in person, if you're doing it online. Definitely, it's not going to happen if you don't want to.
Awesome. And for those of who may not know, right, you both mentioned HackerRank. Do you mind kind of explaining what that is and what your experience was with that new curriculum, new challenge there?
You mean the
hackathon? The hackathon.
Yeah.
My bad.
I was like, that was HackerRank? I don't think I did. No, the hackathon was really cool. It was just a sort of a short little side project in addition to the 4 that you do in the bootcamp. And I know going into it, a lot of us were really worried. We were like, oh, how big is this? Like, we think of hackathons and we think, people up like in the middle of the night, like frantically coding, right? Like, at least that's what I thought, like, just seeing movies or something. I don't know why I have that idea in my head that that's what people do when they do hackathons. But, I was concerned. I was like, am I going to be able to have time, for my projects and still do this hacking thing? But I'm so glad that I did it. It was tons of fun. I put in maybe like 10 hours of work. Like, it wasn't bad. It was spread out. Well, actually probably more than that when you include all of our meetings that our group had. But, we did it for about a week. No choice. We weren't up overnight. At least I wasn't. Yeah, so, I put in a decent amount of work. I mean, it wasn't a tiny amount of work. We really did try hard. But I didn't feel that it really disrupted my ability to do the rest of my work. I got maybe, a couple of days behind, but it wasn't anything that I couldn't sort of make up in the pacing that I had wanted to achieve. And for what I gained from doing that hackathon was 100%, worth the kind of catch up time that I spent to get back on track on my other projects. Like Kesman said, the collaboration was huge. I had not really used GitHub. I was lucky I had one person in my group that was a kind of a GitHub pro from whatever his background was. I think he was a software developer before he decided to do bootcamp. And so he had a lot of experience with GitHub. So he taught me a lot about GitHub, which was really cool to be able to learn that stuff. And that's not something you would really learn on your own. I mean, I guess you could set up 2 different accounts and be like, hey, I'm sending you this stuff, but it's a little different than when you're working with actual people, right? So I learned that, which you might not necessarily learn if you're just kind of working through on your own. Definitely that kind of workflow, a lot of, depending on the industry that you go into, chances are at some point in your career, you're going to be working on a team of people, and you're going to have to collaborate and figure out how to, chunk the data up so that it all makes sense to everybody, but so that you can still, answer, individual questions. So that's how we kind of separated that was, okay, we can all see the data. We all have this sort of big picture view of the data, but let's each, kind of address these little questions, which I wouldn't have, kind of known to do if I hadn't had that experience where Drace told us to do it that way, told us kind of gave us some hints about how to organize it. But, it was really interesting because I was a little scared of like, well, how are we all supposed to know what's going on if we're all sort of doing these different things. I couldn't envision that. So it was really good for that collaboration to get that experience. And like I said, those students I'm still in communication with and working with them on other things. So it was really great connection to make for sure.
And Sita's being humble, but her team won the the hackathon. So it was a competition type of format. So we divide ourselves between 4 teams, I think it was. And it was really interesting because throughout the bootcamp, most of the data was relatively clean, organized, and well structured. So it was easy to work with. And this was completely different. This was completely a nightmare. We have a large data set. We didn't have any specific guidance. The description of the data wasn't that great. So it was very real in that sense. So it was a struggle just to get the data to tell anything, and then to build a story from that was something else. So the collaboration was a big plus, and that was forced, right? You have to work with people, you have to collaborate with people. How you change insights, how you clean the data, but also someone else doesn't have to clean it, how you merge that data that is clean with someone else doing that. So there is a lot of that you will probably face in your real work. So that was great. And just being able to hear what other people have to say about same data set at the bootcamp, at the hackathon presentation, that was also great, because you can see how many different ways you can see the same problem or the same data set, and how many different directions you can work with. So I think it was great. I think it's something definitely that is well worth the time you have to spend on it. And I agree. It's like we were 4 in our team. We didn't have to spend that much time. I think it was pretty much the same time, like 10, 15 hours. We didn't have that much time. It was like between Wednesday and Sunday or something like that we have to deliver. So we were able to focus on that and prioritize that very well.
Awesome. And I saw, Sita, you already kind of addressed the question that came through the chat just now, but I guess those day-to-day functions, it would be good to get a little bit more insight on like the note-taking, the learning aspect, your overall experience on that end of it, maybe.
Yeah, like I was saying to the person in the chat who asked if we take notes on the lecture and if it's difficult to do so. I have always been a super avid note taker, and I find it much, much easier in the online format to take notes than in an actual lecture, because you can't tell the lecturer to, stop and let you write. You can ask them to repeat stuff, but it's so much easier in the online format. You can pause the video, you can write your notes. I end up Googling a lot of terms, like, oh, what does that mean? Or I end up referring to, slides from a previous lecture, something like that, in the moment. So when I watch, the lectures, even though they're recorded live lectures, so the lecture, flows for 3 hours, with a 5-minute break here, 5-minute break there. So you could sit and watch the entire thing, but I find that I'll watch, 10, 20, 30 minutes, pause it a few times, write some notes. So I end up stretching out, a 3-hour recording into, 4.5 hours, because, I'm pausing it, I'm writing notes, and I'm really trying to understand the material in the moment. Maybe I'll go around and fiddle with the code a little bit if it's like the coding part of the lecture. So I find it much, much easier than live lectures. And at first I was a little put off, because I was like, well, what if I have a question in the middle of the lecture? And then I realized, like, oh, I can literally just Google it, right? So I find that much easier to work with. And I was really pleasantly surprised at how much I actually prefer being able to watch videos. At first I thought, my attention span, I'll zone out, but then you just rewind it. And you can pace it exactly how you want to. If I'm not feeling it that day, I won't do it right then. I'll work on something else. Whereas if it was a live lecture, back in my early days of college, I would just fall asleep in the back, right? But now you don't have to fall asleep, because you can just pause it and switch your strategy, and then come back to the lecture at a different time. So I find it much, much better.
Yeah, I will agree with that. It's pretty easy. And that, I think, kind of ties to something else that I want to mention, is you have to be mindful of what you really dive into. So you're getting exposure to a lot of stuff during the bootcamp. So you have to be strategic about what you really want to learn from the bootcamp based on what your goals are, career-wise. Because you could, like, the 3 hours lecture, 3-4 hours lectures are pretty long. So if you stretch that too long, you could be just through the lectures, you'll be like just learning for a long time. So you want to be effective in that sense. So you want to focus on the kind of on the topics that you really need to learn, and maybe just get a sense awareness of the topics that you don't need right away, and then you will be able to go back, because this lecture will be available to us forever. So you have to be mindful of that, but definitely something easy to do. One of the things that we haven't mentioned is that the structure of the lecture is like maybe 3 hours or 2 hours and a half is just theory, and someone is explaining to you the concept, and at the end there's always at least an hour or half an hour of coding practice. So you apply what you learn. So you have an opportunity to go through the same content while you're doing the coding aspect. So you have that within the lectures.
Okay, very cool. And before we end, assuming there are no other questions coming through the chat, would you guys maybe share a piece of advice that you'd give to prospective students who are interested, or maybe, what would you have wanted to know prior to you joining the bootcamp?
Yeah, so there was a lot of things that I was thinking, coming into this panel about how my experience has been, what I wanted before I started, and things that I was able to do to help me prepare. So like I mentioned earlier, I would just say be extraordinarily clear about what you're doing here. And what you want, not just from this career going into data science, but also from the boot camp specifically. I'm so glad that I picked this one, that I ended up here, but maybe it's not for everybody. I'm not sure. You really have to analyze what you're looking for in a boot camp. You're making this investment in yourself, so make sure the structure is something that makes sense to you. If community is a big thing and you're really worried about, am I going to be able to find community in the online, versus the in-person, which I think yes, but some people may, feel differently about that. What career sources are offered. NYC DSA has excellent career resources. I'm not even, done with the program, and I already feel like, I'm going to have a serious leg up when I start my job search, which is something I was worried about, having basically like no job history for the last 10 years, like just my own, like I don't really have like references, and managers or anything like that. So I was really worried about like, I'm going to be able to find a job if like people can't vet me like they could a regular employee, because I was a self-employed business owner. But I already feel like the career resources are great for that. So, be very clear about what you're trying to get, not just out of this career, but out of this boot camp, so that your expectations are in alignment with what your experience actually is. Along with that, same thing, your personal expectations, like I mentioned, those resources, Learning How to Learn and Atomic Habits, understand yourself, and how you function and the things that you need coming into the boot camp. Get everything in your life organized. Like I basically had to tell all my friends and family, like, hey, you're not going to probably see me for a while. Like I am an immersive learner. I know that, and I'm going to just like put my head down and really work on this boot camp. So I kind of prepared everybody else in my life. I prepared my budget, make sure I had enough money to get through the boot camp not working and the job search not working. So that, because I didn't want to have to stress out about those things while I was in the boot camp. And feel desperate, to get a job because I'm like running out of money. So, I made sure all my resources were around. I made sure, my husband knew that he was going to have to cook a lot of the meals probably because I wanted to be laser focused, right? Along with all of that, kind of getting your priorities straight and your expectations and your desires, and just generally getting your mental health, right. Make sure you're setting yourself up to get enough sleep, to eat really high quality food. If I was cooking for myself, I would probably just end up being like, what's the fastest thing I could possibly do? And then eat a lot of junk and then feel crappy and then not be able to work. And now I'm putting myself at a disadvantage, right? So make sure that, you think about all those little things, because those little things really, really, really add up to help you be successful. And we often take those for granted, and they're often the first thing to go when we get stressed and we get overwhelmed. And I'm actually finding that I really didn't need to do quite as much of that preparation as I needed. I thought the boot camp was going to be way more intensive than it was. It is intense, but it's not like breakneck pace, where I'm up in the middle of the night, I'm like chugging Red Bull, like trying to keep up, like as long as I have my schedule and I stick to it pretty well. I mean, there's definitely days where I'm just like, screw it. Like, I'm just gonna, go and have some fun today and go out in nature or something. But, I don't allow that to be every single day. So as long as I am, on track, I don't feel super stressed and pressured. I think the reason we have that stigma of people like working through the night is because they don't have these systems in place. So if you have those systems in place for yourself, what you really truly need, then you will just be successful and it will feel relatively effortless. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but actually having that discipline allows you to have a tremendous amount of freedom than just kind of freewheeling your way through it. So hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, and I have to echo everything that you have said, Sita. So be prepared for the challenge. It's intensive, but I agree, it's not going to be a huge thing that you won't be able to do. So I just want to add a couple of things. One is that the team at the bootcamp and the program, they offer a wide range of support. So you should be, my advice would be to start thinking as soon as possible as your career goals. And one of the things that I really appreciate from the bootcamp was that they partnered with a mentor that was really aligned with my experience, have kind of the same path that I had. So you went from a similar background to an industry that I was interested in. So express that when you're doing your interview, when you're submitting your application, think about what you want to do, what your goals and career are, because they will be able to help you find the right mentor, the right support within that. So the sooner you're thinking about that, the better you will be. And the other thing is, if you get to the bootcamp, you try to use your projects to get feedback on how you're doing as a data scientist, not just to check a box, not just to learn a specific skill, but overall you want to understand how you're doing as a data scientist, how you're thinking, how you're approaching the problem, and they're really good at providing feedback on that. So try to explore it that way. So in addition to what Sita said, I think that those are the two main things I will add.
Great. Well, with that all being said, thank you again. Thank you both so much for joining us today and sharing those experiences with everyone.